Hi, this is Dave Kelly. I'm in Petersburg, Virginia. About a week ago I was contacted by email from Weapons Edge, and they asked me if I would give them some video commentary on some of the reproduction swords that I purchased from them over the years. I currently still have about 12 of them in my collection, out of maybe 17 that were purchased over time. And for this particular test interview, I'm going to use 5 French swords that I've retained as part of my collection. The first one is Weapon Edge 1002, which is the French Imperial Guard light cavalry saber. When Napoleon became emperor in 1804, he decided that all of the weapons in the Grand Army would be changed to something more stylish and particularly marking his reign. So here you have a 33-inch long bladed single bar guard like cavalry sword that replaces several weapons following a hussar tradition that started in Eastern Europe. This blade is much closer to the Montmorency style blades that were becoming very popular during the period. It's at 33 inches long on the blade. The point of balance is about 5.5 inches. Weight is about 2.5 pounds. For a light cavalry weapon, that is rather heavy. Not impossibly heavy, but it's more the heavy of a medium weapon of the 1830s rather than what is typical of the Napoleonic period, where you wouldn't expect one of these to exceed 2.2 pounds. And 6 ounces can make a great deal of difference in the handling of a blade such as this. Fit and finish is very good. The markings are consistent with what you'd expect to find in Klingenthal. I didn't actually check to see if it's got the right inspector markings on it. One of the major giveaways when you're looking at this, that is the difference between a historical saber of the period, is the ricasso, the unfinished bar at the bottom of the blade that's exposed. Typically, for a Napoleonic sword, there might be a trace ricasso of maybe less than 1/4 inch, and this one is well over 1/2 inch. And some of the other reproduction ones that are on the market are as long as the languettes that are hanging out here. The languettes exist on the outside of the blade to actually help to lock the sword into the scabbard. The scabbard that comes along with the Imperial Guard weapons is very high class for the period. Brass, it's got a wooden core with leather liners in these port openings. Rather complex for the scabbard maker, and probably don't hold up as well because the ports just create a leak point, and it's very hard to maintain these things because you've got leather and brass that require 2 different cleans that you don't want to get on each one of them. The other weapon is WES 1001. It's a presentation sword reproduction for Marshal Andras Haddick of the Austrian army. Haddick became an Austrian hero during the 7 Years' War when his light brigade conducted a raid on Berlin, surprising Frederick. There were 5,000 garrison troops, and Haddick, with 3,000 men in his attack force, bluffed his way into the city, collected a ransom, and then expeditiously got away with his money. The weapon is not quite period correct. The scabbard that comes with this and the hilt, if you take pictures of the Haddock presentation sword, they're very correct. This is very good on the hilt side. The blade, though, is exactly the same blade that you see on the French Napoleonic blade, and the 1760 blades that the Austrians were using were still maybe 2 inches shorter, much thicker, and not as curved. So very handsome display piece, not quite historical in the way that it's set up. Same problem, weighs about 2.5 pounds rather than 2 pounds. The cravats and sword knots don't have anything to do with WEI. They have to be purchased separately. I found an individual who makes these cravats for several companies in Europe and independently sells them on eBay. And I think I got this particular sword knot from McFarthing Bowl, who seemed to be the most accessible one at the time for purchasing that. The next one that I wanted to address is the Grenadier Guards of the Imperial Guard saber, the WES 1048 is the number. Grenadier Guard's probably the most famous of the Imperial Guard cavalry units, a unit that could claim to never really have been defeated. Even at Waterloo, they very martially walked off the battlefield, and everybody left them alone. They were still a very dangerous outfit. This is really an 1810 saber that was provided to them. Large basket hilt, 37-inch blade. This weighs about 3.2 pounds, and that's a little bit too heavy. Matter of fact, it's almost a half a pound too heavy for the weapon. The blade that you see here is 1¼ inches wide. It should only be about 1 1/8 inches. I have a French 1822, which has an 1817 blade, which is very much the same as the blade that would be employed on this weapon. And you can see that there's a substantial difference in the mass between the two blades, where this one is very labored in trying to make a cut and a recovery. This French blade is very easy to handle. A corresponding blade that would have been used by heavy cavalry officers is this Garde de Bataille, Battle Guard, which came along in around 1788, was very popular in the old army and was carried into the Napoleonic army by the regulars. As a heavy cavalry, it is attached to the dragoon cuirassier straight blade, double fullard, hatchet point on the end of it. This sword did weigh about 3 pounds, and most people that handle the replicas marvel at how these were being wielded by French cavalry, because the point of balance on these replica swords is about 9 inches, sitting way out here, which tells you that this blade has very little taper on it. There's a lot of metal sitting out to the front of the sword, which makes it extremely difficult to maneuver or hold this blade out. I have here an actual Garde de Bataille for a cuirassier officer. You can see here that The hilt's significantly larger in reality over what the reproduction allows for. The other thing, the officer who owned this sword only wanted 35 inches instead of 37 inches on his blade, and this sword weighs 2 pounds exactly. So it's effortless. I mean, this is a small sword practically. But if this sword could talk, the tales it would tell. Underneath it I keep my Grenadier straight palache. Weighs 3 pounds. It's difficult to tell looking at a small camera. The difference between this and the other sword is the taper, where this sword is almost 9 centimeters at its base and comes down to 1.86 centimeters when you get up here to a very thin stabbing blade in the foible of the sword. So where that sword is very awkward to handle, actually manipulating the sword into line, back again, or even making a stroke with this isn't all that difficult, because the weight really is down here, not up in the front of the weapon. The last weapon is a Garde du Corps WES 1050. Once Napoleon was removed and the Bourbons were restored, Louis XVIII and his bureaus set about redoing all of the equipment that the French army owned to, take all of the Napoleonic equipment out of service. A personal bodyguard of 100 men was assigned to the king, and they received their own individual swords. Very fine looking, nicely engraved, Bourbon seal on the handle, and various emblems of accompanying signs on this end. Blade again is 1¼ inches, which is not correct, but surprisingly this is a newer model. The taper is not too bad. It should be thinned out a little bit and a little quicker, but it actually handles much better than the old Grenadier sword. Still a little bit heavy. Balance is still out at about it's about 5½ inches in this case, which really isn't too bad. So this is an improvement. And as a test, I'm not at all happy with any of this, but there it is.